The ballroom of the West Bridge Hotel glittered like something out of a royal dream. Crystal chandeliers dripped golden light onto polished marble floors, and a sea of sequined gowns and tailored tuxedos shimmered under the glow. The city's elite were gathered. Bankers, politicians, socialites, all orbiting around Michael Turner, the billionaire CEO of Turner International, and his glamorous wife, Vanessa. Vanessa loved hosting these parties. For her, they weren't just celebrations. They were spectacles of power, showcases of wealth, chances to remind everyone of their place in the world. She prided herself on knowing exactly who belonged and who didn't, which was why, when she offhandedly invited the cleaning lady from her husband's corporate offices, it wasn't an act of kindness, it was a joke. The cleaning lady's name was Grace Williams. 52 years old, she was known for moving quietly through the gleaming halls of Turner International at night, mop in hand, humming softly to herself. Invisible to the executives, she passed, ignored by the secretaries who barely glanced up from their desks. She was the last person anyone expected to see in a ballroom full of millionaires. But that night, Vanessa's smirk faded when the grand doors of the ballroom opened. Heads turned, conversations stilled. And there stood Grace, not in her janitor's uniform, but in a gown of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light and give it back in silver. Her natural hair was styled in a regal crown of curls, her chin lifted with quiet confidence. She didn't just walk into that ballroom. She arrived. For the first time, the invisible woman was the center of the room, and the people who had once dismissed her would soon learn a lesson they would never forget. Grace Williams had never asked for much in life. Raised in a modest neighborhood by a grandmother who believed dignity was more valuable than gold, she had grown up learning how to hold her head high, even when the world looked down on her. For years, she had worked cleaning offices at night, often unseen, often unheard. At Turner International, she scrubbed the floors of glass-walled boardrooms where million-dollar deals were made. Sometimes, when she polished the long mahogany conference table, she would imagine what it must feel like to sit at it, to be the one making decisions instead of erasing the coffee rings left behind. Her co-workers liked her. She was kind, dependable, always ready with a word of encouragement. But, to the executives, she was background noise, the hum of vacuum cleaners after hours, the faint smell of lemon cleaner in the morning. And yet, Grace carried herself with a quiet grace that no uniform could dim. On Sundays, at her small neighborhood church, she wore hats adorned with feathers and pearls, singing hymns with a voice that filled the rafters. There, she wasn't invisible. She was seen. She was loved. Vanessa Turner. Vanessa Turner, on the other hand, had lived her entire life in the spotlight. The daughter of a wealthy developer, she had grown up in private schools, summering in Europe, her future paved with marble tiles and red carpets. Her beauty was as much a weapon as her wealth. When she married Michael Turner, she married not just a man, but an empire. Together, they became the city's power couple, appearing in magazines, hosting galas, and shaping the social scene. But beneath Vanessa's polished charm lay something sharper. She measured worth not by character, but by appearances. To her, people like Grace were invisible, except when they could serve as the punchline to a cruel joke. So, when she tossed Grace's name onto the guest list as a surprise invite, it wasn't out of kindness. It was to amuse her circle of friends, to watch the room react when a cleaning lady stumbled into their polished world, out of place and awkward. Grace's dilemma. When the gilded invitation arrived in Grace's mailbox, tucked neatly between bills and coupons, she almost laughed. At first, she thought it must have been a mistake. Why would Vanessa Turner invite her to a gala? But as she read the embossed lettering, her heart stirred. Her daughter, Danielle, urged her to go. "Mama, don't you see? This is your chance. You deserve to be there just as much as anyone else." Grace hesitated. "Baby, those people, they don't see me. They'll laugh." Danielle's eyes sparkled with defiance. "Then, make them see you." For days, Grace debated. She could ignore the invitation, avoid humiliation, but a voice inside her, perhaps her grandmother's, whispered, "Walk in with dignity, and no one can take it from you." So Grace went to work. With Danielle's help, she found a seamstress who transformed an old gown into something breathtaking. She styled her hair with care, polished her shoes until they gleamed, and when the night arrived, she didn't walk to the ballroom. Door's a cleaning lady. She walked as a queen. The hum of strings from the hired orchestra floated across the ballroom, a gentle waltz sweeping over the gathered elite. Waiters glided between clusters of tuxedos and glittering gowns, balancing trays of champagne flutes like choreography. The night was a performance, every smile rehearsed, every laugh strategic, every glance a transaction. And then Grace Williams walked in. For a moment, silence seemed to ripple outward, the music almost swallowed by the weight of gazes turning toward her. It wasn't that she tried to command the room, it was that she simply existed in it, with such quiet self-assurance that the room could not ignore her. Her midnight blue gown shimmered with each step, subtle but breathtaking, like water under moonlight. Her pearl earrings caught the chandelier's glow, and her natural crown of curls framed her face with a regal softness. But it was her eyes, steady, calm, unflinching, that made the crowd shift uncomfortably in their expensive shoes. First reactions. At the far side of the ballroom, Vanessa Turner spotted her. The champagne glass in her hand tilted ever so slightly, a ripple of liquid nearly spilling over the rim. Around her, her circle of friends, other wives of CEOs, draped in diamonds and whispers, followed her gaze. "Oh my God," one of them breathed, stifling a laugh. "She actually came." Vanessa's lips curled, a brittle smile plastered in place. "Well," she said lightly, "every queen needs her court jester." But even as she spoke, something in her chest tightened. She had expected Grace to arrive in something plain, awkward, laughable. But instead, Grace had stepped into the ballroom with a poise that rivaled her own, and the eyes of the men, yes, even Michael's, were lingering longer than she liked. Grace's entrance. Grace, meanwhile, felt her heart pounding against her ribs, though her face betrayed none of it. She walked slowly, deliberately, letting herself absorb the surreal beauty of the ballroom. She smelled the mingling of perfumes, the faint aroma of truffle hors d'oeuvres, the sharp tang of champagne. She remembered the nights she had polished marble floors in buildings like this, invisible, while parties raged behind closed doors. And now, here she was, not with a mop, but as a guest. A waiter approached, offering her champagne. Grace accepted, with a nod, her hand steady. A few heads turned, expecting her to fumble, to look out of place. She didn't. She lifted the glass with elegance, took a sip, and smiled faintly as though she belonged. The whispering crowd. Clusters of people leaned into each other, whispering. Some were amused, others curious, and a few, though they didn't say it aloud, were impressed. "Who is she?" someone asked. "A cleaning lady. Can you believe it?" "She carries herself better than half the women here," Grace heard some of the whispers. She let them roll over her like water over stone. She reminded herself of her grandmother's words. Dignity isn't given, it's carried. The CEO notices. Michael Turner, tall and silver-haired, stood near the EB stage speaking with a senator when he caught sight of Grace. His brows lifted. He had seen her before, of course, always at a distance, moving silently through his corporate offices. He had never once imagined her here. But the woman before him seemed transformed, radiant in a way that made the senator's voice fade into the background. Michael excused himself politely and made his way across the ballroom, each step deliberate. Vanessa saw him move, and her smile faltered. Dialogue at the center of the room. Michael reached Grace. "Grace, isn't it?" His tone was warm, respectful. She inclined her head. "Yes, Mr. Turner. I hardly recognized you. You look—" He paused, searching for the word remarkable. A few nearby guests stiffened at his compliment. Vanessa's cheeks flushed hot. Grace smiled softly. "Thank you, sir. It's a beautiful evening." Something about the way she said it, calm, unforced, without seeking approval, struck him. For the first time, Michael wondered how many people in this room had underestimated her simply because of the uniform she usually wore. Vanessa's need to reassert power. Unable to bear the attention, Vanessa swept forward, her gown glittering with sequins, her smile sharp as glass. "Grace," she said, her voice too sweet, "I'm so glad you could make it. I was afraid you'd feel out of place." Her circle of friends tittered, their laughter like brittle crystal. Grace met her gaze without flinching. "On the contrary, Mrs. Turner," she said, her voice smooth, "I feel right at home." Conversations with quiet confidence, speaking about literature, history, and music with a depth that surprised those who dared to engage. A retired judge found himself enthralled by her perspective on fairness and community. A young socialite asked where she had studied, shocked when Grace admitted she had never gone to college, but had spent her life reading, learning, and listening. The ballroom began to shift. What had started as ridicule began turning into respect, and Vanessa felt her control slipping. Vanessa's last attempt. Later in the evening, as the orchestra shifted to a slower tune, Vanessa approached the microphone to address the guests. She decided to turn the spotlight back to herself, to reassert dominance. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said with a dazzling smile, "tonight is about celebrating the extraordinary, and sometimes extraordinary things come from the most unexpected places." Her eyes flicked toward Grace. Some guests chuckled, expecting a punchline. But before Vanessa could continue, Michael stood beside her, his voice cutting through. "The room? Indeed. Which is why I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge someone who has shown us tonight that true elegance, true dignity, doesn't come from wealth or status, but from within." He gestured toward Grace. "Mrs. Grace Williams." The room erupted in applause, and Vanessa's smile froze, her knuckles white around the microphone. The applause still echoed in the chandelier-lit ballroom, a thunderous wave that seemed to carry Grace forward, even as she remained perfectly still. Every clap, every cheer felt surreal. A sound she had never expected to hear in her honor, certainly not in a world so far removed from the one she knew. Vanessa Turner, frozen beside her husband, kept her dazzling smile fixed, though it felt like glass cracking under pressure. Inside, humiliation burned hotter than fire. She had brought Grace here as a joke, a punchline. Instead, the woman had become the centerpiece of the night. Vanessa's chest tightened. She could not, would not, allow Grace to leave with this kind of victory. Vanessa's final play. She stepped forward, taking back the microphone. "Of course," she said, her tone honeyed yet sharp. "What my husband forgot to mention is that Grace is actually part of our staff. A cleaning lady, to be exact. Isn't it remarkable how far a borrowed gown can take you?" A ripple of laughter broke from a few guests. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the cruelty under Vanessa's words. The orchestra faltered mid-note before continuing quietly. Grace's hand tightened around her champagne glass. The sting of the words cut deep, not because they weren't true, but because of the way Vanessa wielded them, like a weapon meant to strip her dignity in front of everyone. For a moment, silence threatened to swallow Grace whole. All eyes pressed against her like heavy weights. Grace's response. But then she lifted her chin. Her voice, calm and steady, rang clear across the ballroom. "Yes," Grace said. "I am a cleaning lady. I've scrubbed floors most of my life. I've cleaned offices where deals worth millions were signed, while I earned barely enough to keep food on the table. I've polished marble halls where no one knew my name, except when they wanted me out of their way." She paused, letting the words settle. The room was pin-drop silent now. "But I'll tell you something, Mrs. Turner." Grace's eyes locked with Vanessa's, unwavering. "My work has never defined my worth. I may not wear diamonds every day, but I carry something no one can take from me. Dignity. And tonight, standing here, I know I belong. Not because of this gown, but because I have always belonged, whether anyone cared to see it or not." The ballroom erupted again, but this time louder, fuller, undeniable. Guests rose to their feet, some even whistling and cheering. The shift. Michael placed a hand gently on Grace's shoulder. His voice trembled, not with pity, but with admiration. "Grace," he said, "you've shown more courage tonight than most of us have in a lifetime." He looked out at the crowd. "Perhaps it's time we reconsider what real success looks like. It isn't in the clothes we wear or the wealth we display, but in the character we carry." More applause. Heads nodded. Even some of Vanessa's closest friends clapped hesitantly, unwilling to be seen as cruel. Vanessa's mask finally cracked. Her lips trembled, her face pale beneath the chandelier light. She stood alone, her circle of allies dissolving around her. The dance. The orchestra, as though sensing the shift, began a slow, regal waltz. Michael turned to Grace. "Would you honor me with this dance?" Gasps rippled through the ballroom. The CEO of Turner Enterprises asking his cleaning lady, the woman his wife had tried to humiliate, for the first dance of the evening. Grace hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. The two moved gracefully onto the dance floor, the crowd parting to make way. As the music swelled, they moved together under the golden glow of the chandeliers. Grace's gown shimmered. With each step, her presence commanding not because of extravagance, but because of authenticity. Every camera, every pair of eyes was on them. And for once, Grace wasn't invisible. She wasn't the woman scrubbing floors in silence. She was a queen in her own right. Vanessa's collapse. From the edge of the dance floor, Vanessa watched. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She wanted to scream, to tear the moment apart, but she knew it was too late. The room no longer belonged to her. Someone whispered nearby, "She invited Grace as a joke, didn't she?" Another responded, "If that's a joke, it's the best one I've ever seen." Vanessa felt her world tilt. The spotlight she once controlled now slipping permanently from her grip. Grace's quiet triumph. When the dance ended, the applause shook the room once more. Grace curtsied lightly, her smile soft but radiant. She hadn't planned to come here and make a statement. She hadn't sought the spotlight. All she had wanted was to walk in with her head held high. But the night had given her more: respect, recognition, and above all, a reminder of her own unshakable worth. Vanessa, meanwhile, melted into the background, her glittering gown suddenly seeming gaudy and hollow compared to Grace's quiet elegance. And for the first time, Grace felt that the invisible walls that had always separated her from rooms like this had cracked. Maybe not for everyone, but for her. The ballroom slowly emptied after midnight, yet the echo of Grace's words lingered long after the music stopped. Guests departed with whispers still on their lips, about the woman who had turned a cruel joke into a coronation. Grace stood near the tall glass windows overlooking the city skyline, her gown catching the moonlight. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in the shadows of the party, cleaning up what others had left behind. She was part of it. Michael Turner approached quietly, his posture softer than the commanding stance he wore earlier in the evening. "You changed the air in this room tonight," he said. "You reminded people of something they'd forgotten." Grace gave him a small smile. "I only told the truth." Michael shook his head gently. "Sometimes that's the most radical thing any of us can do." I'd share, the gown carefully folded across her lap. She pressed her forehead to the cool window, watching the city lights blur into striated arcs of gold. Her phone buzzed. Dozens of messages from co-workers who had seen the event live-streamed on social media. Words of admiration, encouragement, even tears spilled through the screen. "You made us proud. You showed them who we really are. You're a queen, Grace." Grace smiled softly, her chest warm. She had never sought fame, yet the world had seen her, truly seen her, and there was no going back. The ripple effect. In the weeks that followed, stories about the cleaning lady who spoke like a queen spread beyond the gala. Business magazines picked it up. Social media turned Grace into an icon of dignity and resilience. But more importantly, within Turner Enterprises itself, things began to shift. Staff who had long been invisible, janitors, assistants, caterers, began to hold their heads higher. Grace had opened a door for them, a reminder that their worth wasn't measured by titles. Michael, moved deeply by her words, initiated a new company-wide program to provide educational opportunities and mentorship for employees across all levels. Grace was asked to sit on the advisory board. At first, she laughed at the idea. "Me? I wouldn't even know where to start." But Michael's answer was firm. "Start by being yourself. That's more than enough." Vanessa's reflection. Meanwhile, Vanessa retreated from the spotlight. Her social circle shrank, whispers trailing her wherever she went. For weeks, she avoided public events altogether. Yet in that silence, she was forced to face something she had long ignored: her own insecurities. Her obsession with appearances had been a shield, masking the fear that without wealth, without beauty, she was nothing. The memory of Grace's speech haunted her. Dignity. Belonging. Words Vanessa realized she had been chasing in all the wrong places. Though she would never admit it aloud, Grace had given her something she didn't know she needed. A mirror held to her soul. Grace's new beginning won. Crisp morning, Grace walked into Turner Enterprises, not in her cleaning uniform, but in a simple dress and blazer. She wasn't there to scrub floors that day. She was there for the first advisory board meeting. Her co-workers beamed with pride as she walked past. Some clapped her on the back. Others simply nodded with tears in their eyes. Inside the boardroom, with its towering windows and polished wood table, Grace sat among executives who once would never have noticed her presence. Her voice shook slightly at first, but as she spoke, confidence settled in. She spoke about fairness, about opportunity, about remembering that every person in the company contributed to its success. And the room listened. The quiet Queen Grace never stopped cleaning part-time. She still found peace in the rhythm of it, the way scrubbing and polishing gave her time to think. But now, when people looked at her, they didn't just see a cleaning lady. They saw the woman who had walked into a ballroom as a joke and left it as a queen. Her life had not turned into riches overnight, but something deeper had changed. She carried herself with an ease, a pride that could never be taken away again. And every time she caught her reflection, she no longer saw a woman hidden in the background. She saw the queen within herself, always waiting to be revealed.